everybody, and welcome to the Meditation Channel. My name is Jacqueline, and I am a meditation coach. And today we are going to talk about integration, specifically when it comes to shadow work. So how to integrate shadow work. This is actually, once again, a request from one of my viewers. I will read her message. I've been doing this for years, but although I have much more clarity about myself, my life only gets worse. And then I simply asked her, have you been doing integration? And her reply was, what I do is feel my emotions, breathe into them, and ask questions. I thought that would be enough. And then, of course, I suggested to make a video. Here I am. If you have something else to suggest about integration, I would love to hear what you have to say. Thank you. You're welcome. It's hot in this house. Okay, so thank you so much first and foremost for bringing this up, because I did mention in my previous video, which I do recommend, please go and watch this video before you watch this video, because I talk about shadow work and what shadow work is and the 3 signs that your shadow is active. So please, please, please go and watch that video before, because it would make a lot more sense when it comes to this video. But yes, so basically shadow work can make you feel worse. Why is that? Well, here's the thing. When we're dealing with the shadow, we're dealing with aspects of ourselves that we have rejected, disowned, and denied. So oftentimes within that shadow, there are parts of us that we just do not like. There are parts of us that we're afraid of. There are parts of us that we may even feel shame over or disgust. And this is why shadow work can be quite scary at times, but can also be very challenging, because it requires you to go to those places that most people don't want to go. It requires you to see these parts of you that, like I said, you have rejected, disowned, and denied, and you have rejected, disowned, and denied these parts of you for a reason. So as far as her explaining how she processes her shadow work, that is amazing that she can recognize it and actually take the first step, but unfortunately that's not enough. Just feeling your emotions and breathing into them isn't enough, because they're still there. The whole idea of integration, if you think about it, it's kind of doing the complete opposite of what you've been doing, which is what you've been doing has been rejecting, disowning, and denying. And so what I always say is that you have to learn to love, accept, and integrate. And this is very, very challenging. So just feeling the emotions alone and just allowing them to go through you isn't enough. You have to become one with those emotions. You have to embrace them, accept them, allow them to be a part of you. And feeling them alone and then letting them go means that they're still there, which means they're going to keep coming back. And that's why you feel worse, because you're basically putting a magnifying glass on that emotion, on that part of you that you dislike. And ultimately, the law of attraction, what ends up happening is that the more you focus on it, guess what? The more it amplifies. So luckily today, I am going to help you process how to basically integrate. Now, remember, there are many layers to the shadow. So if it is something that still comes up, you have to understand that it's a process. This is not something that will happen overnight. And I would definitely recommend to start with something light. Don't start with like a severe trauma, because that is something that I would actually recommend that you also might want to be working with a therapist with, or a professional who understands shadow work, because it can be intense. It can bring up traumas, and you just want help with that. You don't have to do this alone. This is not something that you have to process alone. And it would be much easier to get through it, if you have the help and the support of somebody else or a professional. So like I mentioned in my shadow work video, there are 3 signs that reveal to you that your shadow is active. Now, I call them these signs because it's just an easy way for my clients and for me to remember. So the first one is circle. And that basically means cyclical patterns. So for instance, you constantly attract people that abandon you, or every time you make money, you cannot hold the money and it disappears. And this is basically a pattern that shows up time and time again, either in your behaviors or in the outside. Now remember, shadow can be internal and external. The law of mirroring states that basically everything that is happening on the outside is a reflection of what is happening on the inside. So ultimately, if it's happening on the outside, that is the law of mirroring saying, hey, this is an issue that you need to resolve within you. The second sign is the gun. Now, the reason why I use the gun, because it is related to triggers, when you get triggered. And just like a weapon, once you get triggered, you're off. You find it very hard to regulate your emotions, to calm down. It's just over emotional, over explosive. An example of a trigger could be, for instance, that you just started dating somebody and you send them a message and within an hour they do not reply. And you go down that spiral. They don't care about me, they don't love me, and suddenly all these abandonment issues start rising up inside of you and you freak out. Okay, and then you jump to conclusions and then you can end up destroying the relationship because of that trigger. So that's an example of a trigger. So the third sign is the mirror. Now, this represents mirroring. Basically, it is to do with how people mirror certain aspects, personality traits, behaviors that are within you that you have rejected, disowned, and denied. Now, I always like to use this example because it's very easy. For instance, if somebody comes in the room and they start bragging about all their accomplishment and how amazing they are and how they just got this new car, and I'm with a friend and my friend is just basically like, good for you, buddy, high five. And I'm like, I cannot stand this person. Who do they think they are? They think that they are the shiz and I cannot stand them. They're just so up themselves. So this could be an example of a mirror. So I reject, disown, and deny the parts of me that is okay maybe with being arrogant. So I reject, disown, and deny, the arrogance. I'm afraid of coming across as arrogant. I'll give you another example of personality. For instance, somebody who's very wealthy. Now, you may have a subconscious resistance towards that type of personality because in the back of your mind, you think that all wealthy people are greedy and they're bad people. And so because you have that, then you might reject aspects of you when it comes to money because you're afraid ultimately that if you do make money, you will become a bad person. So hopefully that makes sense in a nutshell. So how do we do integration? Okay, so let's go through each one of them. I'm going to give you some examples and some tools that you can use to help you integrate. Okay, so let's go through the first one, cyclical patterns. Now, I'm going to use me as an example because this is something that I have actually healed in my own life. And this was something that was actually very obviously a shadow of mine. So I had a pattern of attracting partners, romantic partners who were just emotionally, sometimes physically, just unavailable. Okay, so I would date people, they would ghost me, or I would date somebody who was just never there for me, or, they would hang out with me maybe like once a week, and I needed a lot more than that. Now, when I realized that this was a shadow, I want you first to understand the root cause of it, where the shadow was essentially born. Now, you have to understand that shadows are normally caused by some level of trauma or some extreme event in your life that caused these aspects of you to be suppressed, to go in the shadow. So when I looked at my history, well, I realized that my father, when my parents separated, he moved to another country. And so he was never physically present. And also emotionally, but we had some issues with the family. Now we're fine, but that also reflected in that. So I subconsciously learned that the men in my life would never be physically present and that they would never be emotionally present either. And this developed into a shadow. Now, the second thing that you want to understand is why that shadow was created. Now, in my case, I understood that that shadow was created to protect me emotionally because my father wasn't there. I was hurt by that. And I felt abandoned, yes, but also you develop, because of the shadow, I had developed a level of independence. Okay, so I became very independent. I became a very strong personality. Sometimes these personalities don't develop the way that you really want to. I was quite feisty. I still am. Basically, I developed into a bigger than life, larger than life personality, and it was basically my way of coping with that trauma. Now, this is how the pattern continues to repeat. you will end up being attracted to the very thing that you need to heal. So I kept being attracted to men who would leave me. This is where you have to do some inner work, some inner discovery about yourself and start looking at the patterns. This is why, by the way, writing and journaling is really important, but I'll give you a tool that for me really helped. So one of the things that I realized was that I was attracted, my pattern, my cyclical pattern was that I would be attracted to people who were not in alignment with what I wanted. So the first thing I realized was that I had to break the cycle. I had to break the pattern. Now, this one is very challenging. It's not easy because you cannot, in a sense, help who you're attracted to, right? But I understood that what I was attracted to was bad for me. And it was a symptom of my shadow. So the first thing that you want to do is, number one, recognize the pattern. Number two, accept it. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to deny it. The other thing I started looking at was, in what ways am I abandoning myself? In what ways am I abandoning my masculine energy, the father energy in me, the male energy in me? Because you don't want to just blame the other people. This is something that's happening within you at the end of the day. So this is a little bit of mirroring here happening. So how am I abandoning myself? And you want to do some healing around that. And once again, the pattern, you want to break that pattern. You don't want to repeat the self-abandonment. Now, when you begin to heal these things within yourself, you suddenly stop, number one, attracting them, but suddenly you start recognizing, you recognize the symptom immediately. So it makes it easier for you to stop doing it and for you to stop repeating it. Number three, I had to accept that I did not understand what healthy love was. I had to accept that I did not understand what a healthy relationship was. I did not understand what it was like. I had moments of it, don't get me wrong. I had some good relationships, but oftentimes I would sabotage them. So I ended up going for somebody who had all of the traits that I liked, that I needed, that I wanted. So they would show up. They were always present. They were emotionally available. So I realized the things that were lacking emotionally. And eventually I ended up dating this person. The physical attraction built up over time to the point where now that person's my husband. And it was the best decision that I've ever made. But it took a long time for me to heal this. This also was an intense trauma, okay? This wasn't something that was a little bit of an issue. This was a big issue in my life, and therefore it took many years of healing, but I got there. So I accepted, I loved all those parts of me, and it's very difficult to understand that. So I started loving myself through this process as opposed to hating myself and blaming myself. And then I integrated, which means I took action, and I literally went for the person that I knew was right for me. And this is where we are. So let's think about the second one, the trigger. Okay, triggers can be a little bit more tricky because triggers involve intense, immediate emotional explosion. So this one, I would say, this is something that I would do, for instance. If you get triggered, let me think. Okay, so let's use the example of if you have abandonment issues, and we're going to use the original example where you're starting to date somebody and they do not reply immediately within the hour, and it triggers you. You start overreacting, you get over emotional. And here's the issue. Number one, once again, you're making it about the other person. So that's the first thing that we have to do, is we have to look internally. We have to look at our own shadows as to why we have such an explosive reaction. So something like this, for instance, I would look at it as, why am I overreacting? Of course, you want to do this once you've calmed down. Why am I overreacting? What is this? What is the core need behind this behavior? And this is where it gets a little challenging. You have to go down the layers, okay? And it ultimately comes down to a primal, basic need that isn't being met. So for instance, with the texting, you feel abandoned. That could be one, okay? Or you don't feel loved. When you look down the layers, it's like, why? Why do I feel like this person doesn't care? You can answer the question. So why do I feel like the person doesn't care? Because They didn't reply within the hour. Okay, so then you can say something like, this is actually an exercise that you can do, the why exercise. So you keep asking why. I feel that this person doesn't care because my father didn't care. Let's use the dad again. So why did you feel like your dad didn't care? Well, I didn't feel like my dad didn't care because I didn't feel loved by him. Why didn't you feel loved by him? Because he never replied to my text messages on time. Could be something like that. But ultimately, this is where you have to dig deep and you have to figure it out. This is also why I suggest that you find a professional to help you through this, because it's really important to link up all the emotional traumas, all the emotional events that are connected to a simple act, which is getting angry over a text message. Now that you understand that the reason why you are overreacting or you're triggered, you obviously once again have to break that pattern, okay? So the next time that happens, now, I know that I'm overreacting not because this person didn't text me back in time. I'm overreacting because I'm feeling abandoned. Now, there are a few options here, okay? You can get the other person involved and you can communicate that with the other person and just let them know where you're at. This is obviously, you have to gauge how safe this relationship is, how safe you are with the other person, if this is something that they would receive well. The other thing that you want to do is, how can I begin to, number one, look at myself in ways that I abandon myself. Number two, where is the trust issues here? Why don't I trust myself, in the sense of maybe I don't trust myself to attract a partner who is going to be there for me. So as you can see, the layers of the shadows just keep going down and down and down. Now, here's the key. You notice the issue, you break the pattern. How can I love myself through this process? When an event like this would happen, something that I would do to integrate is like, now this is the love part, okay? How can I make this a part of me? Now, acknowledging the fact that your emotions are valid, that it's okay for you to react this way, that you're not overreacting, that it's coming from a trauma. But number two, also understanding that that's not the other person's fault or something else that's happening on the outside. This is completely you. And so how can you begin to love yourself, self-soothe yourself? How can you begin to support yourself, show up for yourself? How can you be your own parent, your own hero in that moment? And it could be many things. It could be saying kind words to yourself, giving yourself a hug. It sounds crazy, but it does work. Talking to yourself like as if you were a little girl. If you know that this trauma is very specifically linked to an event that happened to you as a child, it's a very powerful exercise to talk to yourself like you're a child. It's like, you know, becoming that parent and saying, hey, it's okay. This is totally normal that you feel this way, but it doesn't mean that this person doesn't care for you. It simply means that they might be busy. Okay, you don't want to jump to conclusions. You understand that you do this every time. So let's just think about it for a moment. What are some of the other options as to why somebody wouldn't reply? So you basically carry yourself through this process. And finally, integrating, taking action, doing loving actions, actually applying these tools and actually learning how to self-soothe yourself when these things happen. Okay, so let's talk about mirroring, the third one. So like I said, let's use the rich people example. When you see somebody wealthy and you find yourself triggered, okay? And suddenly you realize, I have an issue with people who are dressed in Louis Vuitton, okay? I think that they're up themselves. I think that they're showing up. First thing you gotta ask yourself is, what does this represent? So let's just say, for instance, you see somebody who's overly dressed in Louis Vuitton and all that sort of stuff, and just notice how you react. You're going to have a physical reaction, an emotional reaction. And then the thoughts are going to start taking over, and you're going to have almost like a repulsion, okay? On the outside, it just looks like this person is wearing nice clothes and you just might not like the clothes and therefore you don't like them as a person, even though you might not know them. But when you start digging deeper, you might discover that the reason why you're rejecting this is because, like I said, you might discover that you were told from a very young age that basically people who are wealthy are arrogant and they're up themselves and they don't have compassion for the commoners. And these are very negative personality traits and they make you a bad person. So ultimately you have a fear of looking bad. But here's the issue with this. When you reject, disown, and deny that, you reject, disown, and deny wealth. And therefore it'd be very difficult for you to attract wealth into your life because you have a negative association to that. But not only that, it comes down to a core need, which is you will be perceived as a bad person. You will be judged. So you see how that can become a problem? Once you recognize it, once you notice that somebody has that, you got to ask yourself, in what ways am I rejecting this within myself? Whether you like it or not, There is the version of you that likes Louis Vuitton. Okay. There is the version of you that is bad. There's the version of you that is evil. We're not just one thing. Now, doesn't mean that you're going to act upon that. We're all capable of all sorts of things. Oftentimes what happens is when we reject, disown, and deny these personality traits, sometimes they can amplify and we act out in bad ways. That's why we say things like, I'm not going to go and drink, and then you end up at the bar. Because you're suppressing, disowning, and denying a certain need, or you're not accepting certain parts of yourself, and these parts feel rejected, and then eventually they're going to act out. And that's when you do things that are out of character. So it's really important to embrace those parts of you. You see, somebody who doesn't have a problem with somebody who's wearing Louis Vuitton or with wealth or being perceived bad is not even going to react. They're not even going to care. It's not even going to be a thing. Wouldn't it be nice to be that person who sees someone and says, oh, good for you, whatever. So that means that they accept that within themselves. This is something that they've embraced about themselves, and they don't have that inner conflict, inside conflict. They have accepted it, and by accepting it, you become at peace with it. So there's no war, there's no inner battle. Ultimately, they're less likely to behave badly because they're more in control of who they are. So once you understand this, it's very fun to kind of start looking at personalities and people that you dislike and kind of try to say to yourself, well, in what ways am I like this? I can give you an example. For me, I have a real issue with people who are animal abusers. It's a massive trigger for me, and it's something that I have a really hard time accepting. And so I've been doing integration with that. It's like, in what ways am I cruel? In what ways can I be cruel? And you will always find something. Now, do I go out and act on that cruelty? No. But do I have thoughts of cruelty? Yes. Does it make me a bad person? No. But it's in me. And the more I accept it, the more I find peace with it on the outside. And it makes it easier for me to deal with these traumas that I find on the outside with these people who can do such horrible things. Now, this is a little bit more challenging, but you can begin with something very small. Now, remember, once you see it, you acknowledge it, you see it within yourself, you build a loving relationship with it. The love is the key. Remember, love is about seeing something or someone and making them a part of yourself, which is the integration, becoming one. And the reason why we have conflict is because we see separation. If I want to love those parts of myself, once I start accepting the fact that I have that cruelty within myself, and once I really acknowledge the fact that they are a part of me, I have to love them. Well, I don't have to, but I choose to love them. I choose to accept it. And there's a reason why you are cruel. There's a reason why you have those personalities within you. And it's usually because of, for instance, I can only think for myself, I would become very cruel if one of my loved ones got hurt near me, and then that personality would come up to protect. Now, a wounded person who hasn't healed themselves, that cruelty goes to the point where hurt people, really traumatized people, traumatize people. So once you start seeing the levels, then it makes it easier for you to understand that and have a little bit more compassion towards others as to why they do what they do. And it gives you an understanding. The next thing, of course, is taking action. So every time I see this, I recognize it, I love it within myself, and I make a different choice. I change my habits, I change my thoughts, I change my feelings, and I change my reaction to it. Over time, what ends up happening is that you start putting more and more light onto the shadow, okay? And it becomes to a point, like I said, it integrates with you and it becomes one, and you no longer have that inner division, and therefore you find more peace within yourself. Okay, guys, so I really hope that that gave you some clarity on shadow work. And like I said, it's a process. Another thing that I do really recommend that you guys do to help you with the shadow is also automatic writing. Essentially, you basically want to get pen and paper and you want to ask a question to your shadow. For instance, you could do something like, to my shadow, when it comes to my abandonment issues, when was the first time that this was created, this trauma within me was created? When was the first time I created this pattern in my life? So basically, you want to build a conversation with your shadow, okay? So you want to develop a relationship with the shadow aspects of you, and you'd be surprised at what the answers are. If you don't know much about automatic writing, there are a ton of videos on YouTube about it. I might even do a video about it myself, but it's an easy research. And even just journaling with your shadow aspects. Having a conversation with your shadow aspects can be really insightful and help you and basically get the information that is hidden down in the subconscious. All right, guys, I hope this video was helpful. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, write it in the comments below. I will answer them and I might even make a video about it. I am so grateful for your time. As always, have a magical day. See you later.